So Facebook has over like 2 billion active users. Google has at least that many folks using their products. And get this, that number is twice the combined population of all of the G7 nations. So how should we treat these mega corporations? Because there are more than one of them. Should we treat them like independent nations, maybe? Are they acting like nations? That is exactly what my guest, Kasper Klunga, actually is here to kind of talk about. You're the new tech ambassador from Denmark to Silicon Valley, not to a country, to an industry. Tell me about that.
Well, it's basically a decision by the Danish government to respond to what we think are the facts in the world, that technology is a key parameter for influence over you and me, but also influence over international affairs. And the second trend is, of course, that the tech companies are becoming very large entities, and they're playing a role also in defining policies. So we decided that we would try out an experiment to have basically an embassy or a tech representation to the industry, but also to the tech companies. Not only in Silicon Valley, by the way, we have a global mandate, and my team is also in Copenhagen, Beijing, and very soon also in Nairobi.
And the idea of treating these tech companies like countries, I think, is a fascinating one when you think about how much influence they have over our lives, over the citizens of Denmark's life. Does that make it complicated for you or exciting?
Well, both is the honest answer.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't shy away from the fact that we are trying something new. We're not elevating the tech companies to nation states, and we're not giving them the same kind of response or the same kind of treatment as we would a bilateral relationship with a country like the US or Canada. But what we're trying to do is to say, how do we exercise influence over the direction of technology? How do we exercise influence over, if we go back a week, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica case that showed the use of data potentially for influencing elections. That's a major democratic problem and something we need to relate to. So that's the reason why the Danish government decided to try this out. It hasn't all been easy, but we're getting there, and we're just 6 months into the job. So give us a bit more time, and we'll tell you how it goes.
All right. So you opened the embassy outpost in Silicon Valley, but you're here in Seattle, obviously. What are you doing in Seattle? Microsoft, Amazon, probably some other companies, I'm assuming.
Well, you answered the question. It's the second time I'm here in Seattle in just a few months. And it goes without saying that we had significant considerations. Where do we put our representation? Is it in Palo Alto? Should we put it in Seattle and elsewhere? But you have a very, very vibrant tech environment here in Seattle. So we're going to come here very often. And it also feels very homely on the weather front, so it's nice to be
yes.
up with some cold and clouded weather here.
So let's talk about privacy, because you brought it up. I think that's an important one. I think a lot of people have this chief of mind right now. And I think Americans are looking at our government saying, hey, could you protect us when it comes to privacy and data? I'm assuming Danes are saying the same thing to their government as well. How do you see your role in sort of maybe advocating for that with Google, Facebook, Amazon, et cetera?
One of the things that we're trying to do is to acknowledge that the pace of technology is perhaps unprecedented. So it's very difficult to govern in the way we've been doing for the last 50 or 100 years. So what we're trying to do is basically rethink the relationship between the private sector and the public sector, to make the private sector more responsible, to bring them into the equation, to try and have them also come up with the solutions to some of these complex issues. Data protection is a very good issue where we think the industry will need to take a much greater responsibility. Being from Denmark and being a member state in the European Union, of course, we also have the European Union taking a tough line on this. I mean, consumer protection, the view that your data is your data and you need to be in control of that is something that goes to the core of our DNA. And it's also one of the reasons the European Union came out with some pretty tough data protection regulation a few months ago that will come into force in a few months' time. That's certainly part of the conversation we're having with the industry. And we are really hoping that the industry will step up to the plate, talk to us, and find ways forward that is beneficial both to the private sector but also to countries or indeed to individuals.
I think it's fascinating. I love off camera we talked about how other countries are already trying to copy what you're doing. So when you come back to Seattle, I want to have you back because I think there's a lot more to have a conversation here about, and I want to hear how things go. Appreciate your time this morning, Kasper.
Thanks very much for taking time.